tell us the rest. Mike Henderson was with the BOP for 23 years. He was the former regional designator for the Western region, and he was instrumental in a number of the BOP policies concerning inmate monitoring and designation. Excuse me. Alan Ellis is a nationally recognized expert in federal sentencing, a former president of NACDL, which I hope you all belong to, and they have co-authored the Federal Prison Guidebook, and Mr. Ellis has authored other publications as well. And they wanted me to tell you that they'd like to hold questions until they finish the first part. And if anybody wants to meet with them afterwards for a one-on-one discussion, they're happy to do that as well. I know when we need to do airport shuttling, so we've got a little more time than just 12 to 2. Gentlemen, welcome to Phoenix.
Hi, guys. By the way, the one-on-one thing, we deem, if you want to talk, I realize you may have questions about a particular client you want to bring it up in front of the group. If you want to talk one-on-one, it's free, of course, and it's privileged. So I deem that as one attorney consulting with another attorney, privilege. Mike is consulting with our firm. We all agree it's privileged. If anybody thinks it's not privileged, then, but, and if I get subpoenaed, I will contact the NASL strike force, and there'll be 10,000 lawyers inside your courthouse. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to sort of divide this as follows. I am going to, this is not a panel presentation. I'm going to interview Mike. On 3 topics. One is, how do you get your client into the best place possible? What happens if problems arise while your client's incarcerated? And 3, how do you get your client out and home as quickly as possible? Then we'll go into a Q&A session, and then once that's over, we'll do the one-on-one, and we don't have to get out of here, I think, and I know it's scheduled till 2 o'clock, but we don't have to get out of here, I think, till about 2:30, so don't feel like you're constrained. Fair enough? I think this thing is entitled Solving the Mysteries of the BOP. Inmates like to say that 99% of lawyers don't know the first thing about the BOP, the federal prison system, and the 1% who do are all doing time themselves. So my argument is, hopefully be statistically insignificant in the polling show with a little asterisk for some minor candidate. So Mike, let's talk about getting your client into the best place possible. Somebody is sentenced, they get a 5-year sentence. Judge allows them, for the sake of discussion, let's talk about one case, to self-surrender to continue. He's not in, doesn't remand it, says, okay, fine, I'm going to allow you to self-surrender to the facility designated by the Bureau of Prisons, and I'll give you, it's now December the 7th, February 7th. You're in court. Before you leave, and what should you do if you're the attorney as far as trying to get your client in the best place?
Well, one of the key features is of an effective attorney is to get involved with the process of a prison designation before sentencing occurs. Okay, and by that I mean, guide your client if they need some guidance through the pre-sentence interview with the U.S. probation officer. This is where I've seen a lot of problems. It's getting better now as attorneys are getting a little more savvy, so to speak. But Alan, what needs to happen is if you have a client with a substance abuse problem.
What do you mean substance abuse?
It could be alcoholism, drug addiction, that type of thing. It could be prescription drugs or illicit drugs. Anybody who's dependent on that or alcohol as a substance has an abuse problem. Okay? Well, sometimes clients don't like to admit that to the U.S. probation officer. They deny use of illicit substances or any kind of addiction. Well,
Why would they do that?
because they don't want to come forth with that kind of, they're ashamed, or they want to hide it.
Or they think that the judge will look favorably upon them if they were drunk.
That's possible. They just, again, can be a fear of just wanting to hide, it's private. But if that's in the pre-sentence report, that may enable the person, if they're otherwise qualified, to go into the Bureau's drug abuse program.
What's that?
The Bureau's, it's called RDAP, that's the acronym, Residential Drug Abuse Program. And there are different phases of that. There's a non-residential program, but the residential program is the long-term program. It's a 9-month program, which they're confined with only others in a housing unit, not with other inmates who are not eligible for the program, but it's a specialized program. They're guided through that. If they complete that program successfully, they are then eligible for consideration of halfway house placement of up to 6 months and possible time off the end of their sentences.
So let's talk about these units themselves.
I'll just kind of guide you back.
Please.
Back, so the attorney gets, also if you have a client that, can possibly use some kind of vocational training while they're in prison. I don't see that enough in pre-sentence reports. I see, you see educational levels that they didn't complete high school or they barely made it through high school. Obviously, I'm talking about non-professionals. I'm not talking about your white-collar offenders so much. But some of these people, a little bit lack sophistication, don't have strong educational backgrounds. They might be interested in a strong vocational training program. The Bureau has a lot of them, but they don't have the same programs at every institution. So sometimes, if something like that appears in the pre-sentence report, that is helpful in the education part of it. If your client can verbalize to the U.S. probation officer, maybe they'd like some vocational training, maybe there's an area they're interested in. There's a great culinary program in Oxford, not people from Arizona want to go to Oxford, Wisconsin, but there's a great culinary, very lengthy, very in-depth culinary training program. It's one of the star programs that the Bureau of Prisons has. They could go there for that program, then get transferred to a prison closer to home if they qualified for it, got accepted. Those types of things. There are dental programs, dental tech programs in the Bureau of Prisons. Not many attorneys are savvy about those programs. But you can find out about them online through the Bureau of Prisons website or in the book that Alan published as well. Some of these vocational training programs aren't always up and running. If there's no demand for them at an institution, obviously they're not going on, but that can easily be found out before sentencing. Then actually going to the sentencing phase, if you were before it, and I've been before some federal judges in there, I know they're all different, but if you have a judge that is willing to entertain making a recommendation for the client, such as a specific institution, such as the residential drug abuse program, such as vocational training, or if there's a family hardship and the person really needs to be close to home, those things can come to play if you have a judge that's sympathetic to that, willing to entertain it. Have them put that in a recommendation form of the judgment order. And we've seen different types of recommendations. There are generic recommendations, then there are very specific recommendations. The more specific...
Generic being, for
Generic
example?
being, court recommends placement at Lompoc, California, insofar as the Bureau is able to accommodate this request or at the Bureau's discretion. That's pretty generic. There's nothing behind that. In other words, the judge isn't telling the Bureau of Prisons why he or she is making that recommendation. Okay? So the Bureau's going to look at it. They're going to get the designation and say, okay, we've got a generic type, I mean, they don't verbalize this, but the way they look at it, we've got a general type of recommendation for Lompoc, California. Lompoc's pretty full today, so we're going to put it somewhere else. They don't pay that judicial recommendation the same attention as they would a recommendation that comes out and says something like this. The court strongly recommends placement at the federal correctional institution in Lompoc, California, to place the defendant as close to home as possible based on the young ages of his children. In one case we had, the children had medical issues. That, if those kinds of more specific recommendations, or vocational training program at such and such a place, or the residential drug abuse program, the more specific the judge can make the recommendation, and of course this is a lot up to the attorney, and you have to read the judges. Some judges, you know better than I do. If you have a judge that is willing to make a recommendation, go on the record and putting that in the judgment order, the Bureau is going to be able to pay closer attention to the very specific recommendations. They like that. It guides them. I don't know what a judge is thinking. When I did designations, we had in the Western region, now they don't do regional designations anymore. It's all centralized. You probably know that. But
What is centralized now?
In Texas. And we used to go from 6 regional designators, which we had, and this is how irreplaceable I was. They now have about 12 senior designators and about 8 junior designators. So they went from 6 to a real bureaucratic operation. I don't know why they did that, but they've done it. And it's a little more complex than that, but bottom line is, it just makes the designator's job easier if they have a judge who's spelling out a recommendation with some specific rationale behind it. Okay? That way I don't have to guess what a judge is thinking. When I was the designator, we had a compliance rate with judicial recommendations in the Western region of between 84 and 87%, which if you think about it is quite high.
What do you mean compliance rate?
We were able to meet the judicial recommendation 84 to 87% of the time. And would always, at that time, it was Bureau of Prisons policy to write the judge if we couldn't follow a recommendation. Unfortunately, that kind of backfired on the Bureau, because the only letters federal judges were getting was, "Oh, we're not following your recommendation." And so some judges got a negative attitude about that.
Yeah.
The Bureau.
I've heard somebody, I'm sure you go, they never listen to me anyway, why should I make a recommendation? And when in fact, not 85% anymore, but still up there.
Well, they don't place the same emphasis on it. The agency does not place the same emphasis now for a very pragmatic reason, which is prison overcrowding. Okay? They don't have the latitude to place every offender where there may be a judicial recommendation. So again, the weaker the recommendation, the less focus the Bureau is going to put on that. The more specific, if it makes sound reason to the Bureau of Prisons, they're going to try to follow them. They don't always write the judges anymore when they don't follow a recommendation. That requirement's gone by the wayside. I think their percentages are just they're in maybe the low 70s percentage-wise.
So are you telling me that for the sake of that basically, summarize, if you want your client to go to FCI Oxford for whatever reason here, but and there's one bed space available on that date, that the defendant with no recommendation is at the bottom of the totem pole. The one with a recommendation of FCI Oxford, next up, the guy with, I recommend FCI Oxford because I want the defendant to go into its culinary arts program. So upon release, he can get employment in the community. That guy is going to stand a better chance of getting an Oxford than the no-rec guy.
Right. Now, another feature though is sentence length. For example, if the guy that has the recommendation for the culinary arts program in Oxford, Wisconsin, is doing the sentence to 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, the Bureau is not going to give that a lot of placement priority at the beginning. This guy's got lots of time, so they're not going to put him in that culinary arts program right away. Rather see some of these guys go through the program in the latter part of their sentences, where they can hopefully get out and get a job with whatever skills they've got.
What if a judge recommends a guy like Charles Manson to go to a minimum security federal prison camp? What's the likelihood?
I did.
of honoring
I
that?
had a federal judge recommend a murderer be placed in a federal prison camp. This is a murder on federal land, and we wrote the judge saying we can't do this, and he picked up the phone and called the director of the Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C., wanted to know what's wrong with us, why can't we do this? Like I said, they no longer write judges routinely, but we have, the Bureau is always going to designate in accordance with what classification they come up with. The Bureau has minimum security, low security, medium, and high. Those are the 4 security levels.
What's the difference?
Minimum security is your camp, your prison camps.
And they are?
They're basically wide open. Some of them do have fences around them, but not razor wire fences, okay?
You walk away?
You absolutely can walk away. You can walk into town, somebody can pick you up on the roadway at night, take you home. Now, those are prison camps.
That's illegal, you're not allowed to do that, right?
Well, just file escape charges.
Okay.
And you won't go to a camp if they catch you, so. Low security is the next level up. That usually has a razor wire fence around it.
Is there any low securities in Arizona?
Yes, Safford is low security. That's the only low security, so to speak, other than the contract facility for deportable aliens. We have some of those. Those are low security. And those are primarily, well, I know Florence is one, and I don't know what the other current contracts are.
There's a Florence here in Arizona. You took the Florence in...
No.
Oh, here?
Florence, Arizona.
The CCA.
Most of you probably all know about that.
Good.
Yeah, that used to be the biggest place we put the deportable aliens until this 3,000-bed prison in Texas opened up several months ago. But that's low security facilities. And then next up is medium, and FCI Phoenix is a medium. They also have a medium down in Tucson along with the penitentiary now.
Camp down in Tucson?
A very small camp in Tucson, probably around 90 to 100 beds. So it's not very well known because hard to get people in there with that small bed capacity. It's mainly a little support camp for the main institutions. In other words, those inmates can work in places that people in the secure institutions cannot, the grounds and whatnot. And those are the mediums in Arizona. Those are examples.
And the penitentiaries?
Penitentiaries, there's one, a fairly new one in Tucson now. And of course, Lompoc, California, which used to be a penitentiary, is now, it's still called U.S. Penitentiary, but it's a medium. They've downgraded it. Phoenix, of course, is a medium security, and I mentioned that. High securities are now other places in California. Further north, there are penitentiaries in California. There's a penitentiary in Florence, Colorado, and there's penitentiaries in Texas. Those are the closest. Colorado and California and Texas would be the closest penitentiaries to Arizona.
How about dangerousness? What's the difference between, we all know minimum's good, correct me if I'm wrong. Any hint of violence, you go cross-eyed at somebody, you're out of there, right?
Yes.
Lows versus mediums.
Lows, your low security inmates, I'll give you a real big example here in Arizona, is your illegal immigrant, your illegal alien, who's also a criminal alien but hasn't done anything violent. Maybe could be a low-level drug dealer. Is not a high-level drug dealer. Could have been a mule. Could have been one of the guys coming with a backpack of marijuana across the border into Arizona.